Hello from Jerusalem and welcome to Bet Avichai. This is our second session in the series about the first printed books in Hebrew. Professor Shimon Iakerson is a renowned researcher who specializes in medieval Hebrew manuscripts and Incunabula. Today's topic will be developing the Hebrew print in Italy. Thank you very much for joining us, and we're ready to go to Italy.
Thank you, Tamar. Thanks again. And now we are starting our second talk about origin of Hebrew print in Europe in 15th century. But before we are going to speak about books, I just want shortly to point out some very important and basic things. First of all, when we are talking about the second half of the 15th century, we have to remember that we are talking about three Jewish communities in Italy, inside the Italy. It's Italian Jewry, it's a very old community, very rich and, let's say, aristocratics of the Jews. Ashkenazi community, that mostly Ashkenazi Jews that came from reign or from the France and Germany, and Sephardic community. Sephardic people that came to Italy before the explosion of the end of this century. It's very important for us because during all our talks we can see the changing of letters and the changing of taste of the readers between all three communities. As you remember, probably, that the first not dated books in Roma were printed in Italian style of letters. The first dated book in Reggio di Calabria was printed with Sephardic type of letters. And the second first printed book from the same year, 1475, of Piova di Sacca, was printed with purely Ashkenazic type of letters. And the same with Mantua. In Mantua we saw its Italian style, in Bologna also Italian style of books, of letters. All these books were printed as were written at that time on two kinds of materials, parchment and European paper with watermarks. Usually we can say that not every, but mostly edition had some copies for rich people that were printed on parchment, and the rest of copies were printed on paper. So we can see the same book on the, on the clothes of parchment and on the dress of paper. It's absolutely normal. And let's say like this, that the actual transmission from the experimental period to the commercial product of Hebrew books started with the activities of the Soncino family of printers. This family got its name after a small town in northern Italy. They were a scion of distinguished Ashkenazi family that moved to Italy. During the 15th century, 3 generations of the Soncino family were involved with printing. The initiator of the enterprise, Israel Natan Soncino, named the father of all the sons of Soncino, Avihon Dechol Bnei Soncino. His son, Yehoshua Shlomo Soncino, and his 2 grandsons, the sons of his second son, Gershom ben Moshe Soncino and Shlomo ben Moshe Soncino. It is reasonable to assume that Israel Natan's role was not practical, but rather more symbolic. But undoubtedly he participated in selecting certain books for printing and in writing something about them. The story of the establishment of the press, the role of Israel Natan in its realization, and its aims and purposes are related by the proofreader of this printing house, Gabriel Strasbourg, in the colophon to the first book issued from the printing press of Yehoshua Shlomo Soncino. It was done in Tevet 20, 5244. It means 19 of December 1483. So this is a citation from his text. The perfect sage, the man of God, the sage Rabbi Israel Natan, may God protect and preserve him, son of Rabbi Samuel of blessed memory, understood that many people run to seek the word of God, and they will not find other than their staff in hand, and they cannot afford to buy written books. And he called to his son, a man in whom, in the Spirit of God, the sage Rabbi Joshua Solomon, may God protect him and preserve him, who lives in the city Soncino in Lombardy. And he commanded him, saying, you shall build a lasting structure. You will raise up the founts of wisdom and make books by printing, so that there will be two well-known benefits from them. The first, that there will swiftly be many of them until the world will be filled with knowledge. The second, that there should not rise to that in their price of those written with quill or with iron and lead. And he who has not to able to buy expensive books will buy them unexpectedly. In return for gold, they will gain silver. Joshua Solomon Soncino was a printer in the town of Soncino from year 1483 to year 1489. And afterwards, he worked in Naples in 1490 till 1491 or 2. The greatest of Hebrew printers of this time, his nephew, Gershom ben Moshe Soncino, was active in Soncino itself from year 1487 to year 1490. After that, in Brescia, from 1491 to 1494, and in Barco around 1496. And it seems in other places as well, that are not specified in colophons. His brother, Solomon Soncino, printed at least one book. It's Turim, if I'm not wrong, apparently in Soncino in about year 1490. But we have no evidence that he took part in printing of other books as well. Also, it is to this family undertaking that the lion's share of the earliest products of Hebrew printing in Italy must be ascribed. Most of the books have more or less detailed colophons that usually contain an indication of the date and place of printing. The printing's names appear relatively seldom. Joshua Solomon Soncino appears only in 5 books, 3 times in Soncino period and twice in the Naples period. The name of Gershom ben Moses is mentioned 10 times, twice in books printed in Soncino, 5 times in those printed in Brescia, and 1 time in a book printed in Barco. And also twice in books whose place of printing have not yet been identified. Solomon ben Moses is mentioned as previously known only once. Twice the name of printing house, Bnei Soncino, the Soncino sons, appears. One gains the impression that the printers were not particularly interested in distinguish among them. They wanted just to make it as the family business of Soncino's family. All the time, the printers used the same ornaments, the same kinds of paper, as well as the same letters, the same typefaces, and they employed the same craftsmen and so on. The house of Soncino can be credited with many achievements in the development of Hebrew printing, in the design of the letter shape, notably in a Sephardi style. It's absolutely important to stress that they were from Ashkenazi origin. They worked in Italy, but they decided to take Sephardic style of letters and to make it the common style for all of us. The letters that we use today came from the idea of Soncino family. And they also were very involved in selection of book printed. Most importantly, Joshua Solomon Soncino mastered 2 complicated tasks: the printing of tractates of the Babylonian Talmud with Rashi, with Tosafot, with Piskei Tosafot, and with Sefer Mordechai. And it requires not only Talmudic erudition for editing this text, but also they need a special professional skill in arranging the layout of all this material on the one leaf. So the look of the page of Talmud that we know today, it's a page from the Soncino presses. I just want to show you how it looks in Soncino press. Just a second, please. Here we are. This is Masechet Brachot. Soncino, you can see it's very famous frame from the opening word Me'ei Matai. And it's a text in the middle, Rashi and Tosafot. And we don't have, unfortunately, this edition in Russian collection, so I took this picture from the very famous album of Hebrew Incunabula, Thesaurus Typographia Hebraica, cycle 15, that was printed in Berlin in 1924, 1931. Very, very important, really thesaurus for Hebrew first printed books. Also, Soncino was the first, Yehoshua Soncino was the first who printed the whole Bible with complete vocalization and cantillation marks. As you remember, in the edition of Psalms from 1477, they tried to put vocalization, but it was not possible for them at that time, so they did it only on some first pages, and after that decided to switch to the non-vocalization text. So Yehoshua Soncino was the first one who printed the whole Hebrew Bible, Biblia Hebraica, with vocalization and accents and cantillation marks. Gershom Soncino printed many Bibles, and the small size, normal size, pocket Bibles, etc. And he was the first one who also printed Belle letters, liturgy work, Machberot Immanuel. It means the combination of the Makamos of Immanuel Haromi. Immanuel Haromi was a very important author from the time of Dante in Italy. He was born in 1261 and died in 1328. He wrote not a poem, but some of his poems looks like a poem, look like the story of Decameron in the Hebrew language. And it's very interesting to point out that after that, in the Shulchan Aruch, by Yosef Karo, it was forbidden to read, to copy, and of course to print Machberot Immanuel Haromi. So we had only 2 editions of Soncino family from the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century. After that, it was forbidden for many, many centuries, and only in end of the 18th century, I think it was printed after Yosef Karo. So it's very, very important and rare book. He also printed Meshal HaKadmoni, and it's the first book with illustration in Hebrew, and he printed it twice, by the way, and others. It is worth adding that Gershom Soncino was the only Hebrew printer to continue printing into the 16th century. He also gained the only Hebrew. He also was the only one who experienced in the printing non-Hebrew books. He worked in various cities in Italy, in Fano, in Pesaro, in Ortona, and in Rimini. And in his old age, he reached even Turkey, Saloniki, and Constantinople. And he died in Constantinople in the year 1534. In the middle of the printing of the book by David Kimchi, Michlol, that was completed by his son Eliezer. He was also the printer in Constantinople. Let's see some of his books, just a second. Oh, for example, this is a very, very interesting volume of Machzor, of Machzor, from the collection of the Institute of Oriental Manuscripts. It was printed during the whole year, from the year 14. I don't remember exactly the year. It's funny. From the year I think 1485 to the year 1486. But we cannot say on this that it was printed during the whole year, because at that time the press, the house, printing house, moved from Soncino to Casal Maggiore. So we don't know how long it took to establish a new house. And it's very, you can see here the combination of the illumination by hand with the typical colors of Italy of this time with the printed text of the book of Kohelet. It's the beginning of the second volume of this big Machzor. It was printed, by the way, also on parchment and on paper. Here we can see the paper copy. And for example, in Moscow, in the State Library of Russia, we have the parchment copy. And in New York, in the Jewish Theological Seminary, they also have parchment copy, if I'm not wrong. Just a second. How it goes. It's very, very rare edition of Soncino family that was printed in 1488. This is a grammar works of Mahalach Shvilei Hadad by Moshe Kimchi. It's a practical grammar of Hebrew language that was in use in the hands of Christian Hebraites. We know it's a lot. And it was after that printed many times with the commentary of Elia Bachur, very famous teacher and researcher of Hebrew language and also an editor of Hebrew books in the printer house of 16th century Venice, for example. This book we have today only in 2 copies. 1 copy in St. Petersburg, not completed, and 1 copy also not completed in Paris in National Library. But it's very important that the copy of St. Petersburg was in the hands of Elia Bachur himself, and this is the autograph remarks of this very important sage. It's his material for preparing the commentary to this grammar. Just a second, maybe. Okay, this is a Talmudic treatise Nida, as you can see, Masechet Nida, that was published by Yehoshua Shlomo Soncino in the year 1489, and it's also from the collection of the Institute of Oriental Manuscripts, and you can see the stamp of the institute, you can see the stamp, modern stamp, unfortunately, of our times, that it looks barbaric on my taste. And some inscriptions of the owners like Mordechai Sasson or someone else. But what's interesting in it, we can see the frame. And we know, of course, you can understand that there is no connection between this frame and between the contents of the Masechet Nida, of the tractate of menstruation. But we know this border, this frame, from some Christian editions of this time. So we can understand that Soncino took this frame from them, but to put it on the edition published in Hebrew language, he cut it, because they need to do it opposite. So he cut it twice and changed the borders of the frame. And after that, we can see this, exactly this frame with another combination in Christian books also. So this is a real evidence of how it worked in 15th century, how it was a cooperation between printers at that time. Just a second. No, this is not. Okay. In addition to the Soncino family, another Ashkenazi family contributed considerably to the development of the art of Hebrew printing at that time, namely Joseph ben Yaakov Gunzenhauser, named after the town of Goldsenhauser in Bavaria, and his son Azriel, who worked in Naples, which at the end of 15th century, as a result of wise policy of King Ferdinand I, Naples turned it into an important Jewish center. Their printing house was founded in Naples in 1487. Its founding is attested in documents from the date March 18, 1487, and it deals with the agreement among 4 people about the printing of Hebrew books: the banker Manuel de Cave, Elia Folheiri, the printer Joseph Gunzenhauser, named Magister Joseph Hebreo, and his helper, the proofreader Yaakov Baruch Landau, Magister Yaakov Hebreo. And by the date of the printing of the first book, Sefer Tehillim, with the commentary of David Kimchi, it was published and singing exactly some weeks after the singing of agreement. Of course, the organization of a printing house takes some time, so it can be determined that the printing house was established close to March 1487. We don't know the exact date on which the work of Goldsenhauser or his son in the city came to end, but this certainly happened after July 1482, when the printing of the last dated book was completed, the commentary of the Pentateuch of Rabbeinu Bachya. The Goldsenhauser family printed 13 books. 4 of them carry the name of the father, 2 the name of the son, and 1 book notes it was printed jointly by both of them. For example, here you can see the book named Makre Dardeke. This is a dictionary of Hebrew language from the year 1488. And you can see that it goes after the letters of Soncino, I would say. We can call this Rashi letters today, but it's Sephardic semi-cursive. By the way, Rashi himself never used this kind of writing, of shape of letters. The name Rashi letters or Rashi script came after the publications of Soncino, because they used this Sephardic semi-cursive for printing his commentaries. Just a second. This is very important publication of Goldsenhauser family. This is the only one publication of the 15th century of the whole big medicine canon of Ibn Sina, of Avicenna. This also you can see. Also here you can see the stamp of Russian censura from the year 1837 with the name of the censor rabbi, probably Averbuch. And you can see own inscription in the margin, yes. And this is a sefer, fourth sefer of the big canon of Ibn Sina. I just want to say that it is very important to underline that it was the only edition of 15th century. This is the book of Yaakov Landau, Sefer Agur, that was printed by them. Also put attention on the border. Of course, you can understand now that it is borders that taken from Christian book, of course, with angels and with all these themes. And for us, this book is like milestone in the history of Jewish book law, because it is the first book that was printed with the approbations, with haskamot of rabbis of this time. It's the first and the only book of 15th century that was printed with haskamot of rabbanim. And it's very interesting texts. I'm really going to work on this and to publish these texts with translation, but it will take time. So now I would say that we spoke about two big organizations of printing of Hebrew books. I mean the Soncino family and the Gunzenhauser family. It's important to underline that it's only one time that in one place in Napoli there were two Hebrew printing houses in one time, of Soncino and on Goldsenhauser. And once they print the same book. Two of them printed the book of Shorashim, of Roots, by David Kimchi. And if you read the colophon of these books, you can see the, how they write about each other, about the concurrence of two book sellers, of course, and book printers. But apart these two big printing houses, we have a problem. So we spoke about many places with no a real problem. The real problem of the 15th century that we do have editions with no evidence about it. No place, no name of typograph, no date, but what's more difficult for us and more important for understanding the process, with no using of the same letters, of the same fonts in any another edition. It's like a secret book, let's say. One of these books is halachic, very famous halachic work, Treatise Kol Bo, all in one book. The book of Kol Bo, you can see the page from the collection of the Institute of Oriental Manuscript, is also very rare. It's printed with the same type of Sephardic letters. So let's say it was printed in the late 80s or the 90s of 15th century. But we cannot find the same letters in any another book. We clearly understand that it was done in Italy, for sure. And by the study of paper market and by the study of type and paper, we can say that it is, as I said, end of the 15th century. But no more, we cannot say who printed this book, where it was printed, why we can understand, because it was a really very famous one. It's not only this. We have, for example, daily prayer book according to the Ashkenazi rite with questions we don't know. We have one Bible that we cannot understand who printed it and why it was printed. And one more book that I want to show you. This is This is Pentateuch with the translation into Aramaic language, Targum Onkelos. And it's very interesting that we have a lot of information about this book. We have a lot of names who did this book. We have a lot of names who was involved in the printing of this book, but no date and no name of place. The printer, De Este, his name, he wrote that during the printing of this book, he was out for wedding of his daughter for 1 week. He was out of the city for wedding of his daughter for 1 week. What can we understand from this phrase? Some people said if he wrote that he was out from the city, it's understandable that it was only one city that you don't need to mark his name. It was Roma. So he was out of Roma. It's probably it was printed in Roma. But we really don't know, is it right or no? So the question also, is it Italian print or maybe not? But I really think, and I put in my catalogs, I always put it in Italian area. It looks Italian, more Italian, and also from the names of editors and proofreaders, etc., etc. So it's Italian edition with no location and no dating. So summarizing our talk about Italy, we have to say that, first of all, we know more about Italy than we know about Spain and Portugal. We will talk about Spain and Portugal in our next session. But talking about Italy, let's summarize. We don't believe the first book was printed in Avignon in 1446. We do believe that Hebrew print in Italy started with non-dated books of Roma, and we can date it on the basis of research of watermarks, evidence, and comparing with the Christian editions of this period and of this city, that it was done in Roma in the period of 1468-9, 1470-71. After that, we know that the first dated books goes back to the year 1475, but probably between the beginning of 70s and the 75, books were printed maybe in Mantua by Avraham Conant. And in any cases, it was in the same time. We also know that there was no one book printed with mobile letters, movable letters in Germany at that time, but they used Hebrew wooden cotton letters for their needs in Christian books in the same 1475. It was the first attempt. We can know that in Italy, letters from the shape of Spanish semicursive, Ashkenazic semicursive, and Italian semicursive were in use. We know that the stage of experiments finished with the role of Soncino family in the whole process. And Soncino family started to publish two the very, very important books. Babylonian Talmud, not all the treatises, but about 20 treatises. And the Bible with vocalization and te'amim and cancellation. We know that in Naples, that was a really great atmosphere for Jewish community. It was possible to have two printer houses at the same time. We also know that we cannot say exactly how many printed houses were in use at the 15th century in Italy. And we do think that about 100 books were printed in Italy, and from these 100, around 100, half of them were printed by Soncino family. So this is a whole picture of Italy of these days, and also we know the cooperation between Christian and Jewish printers in the frame of illumination and illustration of the books. Now, I want to say you that in the next meeting we will touch the history of Spain and Portugal, and we will discuss the repertoire in general, the repertoire of Hebrew printed books of the 15th century. Thank you very much for your attention. Shalom from Yerushalayim and Kol Tov.